Yeah, at the outset, thank you so much, dear Praveen, for your kind introduction. And good evening, dear my professional colleagues, and my co-speaker, Dr. Sepuri Tirumala Devi. And it's a pleasant evening to be with you. First of all, I would like to pay my tributes to Dr. Grant Frederick Banting, who is the pioneer in the discovery of insulin. And now we are celebrating the centenary celebrations of insulin, the 100 years of journey of insulin. So, along with Banting, Charles Best, and James Collip, and J.J.R. MacLeod, who were awarded the Nobel Prize actually for the discovery of insulin. And I also thank Novo Nordisk people for bringing out the first commercial preparation of this particular insulins. And with that, we get into our today's topic, the pathophysiological peculiarities in the type 2 diabetes mellitus, especially with regards to the South Indians. The context is South Indians, and especially the South Indians, also the Southeast Asian Indians, that is our Indian subcontinent actually. The clinical implications for insulin therapy. And this is my financial disclosure. And today's agenda is being divided into 4 parts: the incidence and prevalence of diabetes in South Asians, the complications of type 2 diabetes mellitus in South Asians compared to others, and the pathophysiological peculiarities of the type 2 diabetes mellitus in Southeast Asians, that is the poor insulin secretion because of the impaired beta cell reserve at the time of diagnosis, and the ectopic fat deposition, and the low lean muscle mass in the South Asian population, and the clinical implications for insulin therapy in South Asian phenotype. And coming to the first part, let us see the incidence rates of diabetes in South Asians. So, the left hand side you can see the bar diagram which is showing the dark blue is representing the diabetes population, and the light blue is representing the pre-diabetes population, and the green bar is representing any grade of dysglycemia. So this is the left axis, the x-axis is the incidence rates per 1000 person years, and you can see that the incidence of diabetes is somewhere around 22.2%, and the pre-diabetes is 29.5%, and any degree of dysglycemia is around 51.7%, and it is alarmingly high incidence of pre-diabetes and diabetes. I every time tell you that pre-diabetes is also very important. That is a term called the pre-diabetes stage before the diabetes, which constitutes either the impaired glucose tolerance or the combination of impaired fasting glucose along with impaired glucose tolerance is defined as pre-diabetes. Why pre-diabetes is important when compared to diabetes? It is of the mere bare fact that the cardiovascular complications and the macrovascular complications are at par with the diabetes when compared to this pre-diabetes population. So the incidence of heart attacks and strokes are at par with the diabetes. So this is why we have to trace out the patients at the stage of pre-diabetes and start counseling them against this particular lifestyle modifications like diet and exercise, and the importance of stringent control, the glycemic triad, the fasting plasma glucose and the postprandial plasma glucose, and the HbA1c to have a normal the quality of life, and they not allowing the patients, not letting down with the cardiovascular complications, that is atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease in prediabetes. So we move on to the next slide. And this slide shows us the prevalence rates of diabetes and its complications in South Asia. So diabetes in South Asia is 4 times higher than the other ethnic groups. This is the take home message, very important point. It is 4 times higher than other ethnic groups. And on the left hand side you see the vascular complications, and on the right hand side high glucose and the insulin and the fatty acid levels, the vascular complications, again they lead to the diabetic stroke. And the ischemic stroke per diabetic patient young in Pakistan is around 30.5%. Ischemic stroke per diabetic patient below the age of 45 in Sri Lanka is 5%. And the other side we see the complications regarding the nephropathy, that is the diabetic kidney disease. The microalbuminuria per diabetes patient in Asia is 24%, it's huge actually. And the microalbuminuria per diabetes patient in India, per se in India, is 26.3. It is terribly huge. That is every 1 in 4 persons is suffering from the microalbuminuria. Now it is been of late designated as the UACR, that is urinary albumin creatinine ratio. The 2021 the American Diabetes Association Standards of Medical Care for Diabetes has changed the terminology. The microalbuminuria is being replaced by urinary albumin creatinine ratio. And coming to the retinopathy per diabetic patient in channel, that is India, is 18%. Let it be a proliferative diabetes retinopathy or the non-proliferative diabetes retinopathy. And coming to the neuropathy as such, again neuropathy we have the sensory neuropathy, which is commonly seen, and which is not seen is the autonomic neuropathy, and rarely we see the motor neuropathy also. The DPN per type 2 diabetes patients in Sri Lanka is somewhere around 24%, and the nephropathy or the diabetic kidney disease per T2DM in India is 19.1%. So I remind you that the leading causes of either the myocardial infarction or the strokes put together, the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, or the peripheral arterial disease, or the peripheral vascular disease, PVD or PAD, the macrovascular complications or the microvascular complications, let it be the diabetic kidney disease or the diabetic retinopathy or the diabetic neuropathy, is very high in our the Indian population, that is 4 times more than the other ethnic groups. And that is the reason why if one heart attack is recorded in the Western scenario, that is US and the Canada and the Europe, we record 4 heart attacks in India. One stroke is recorded in the same Western scenario, we record 4 events in India. And diabetes and the hypertension, they remain the silent killers for either the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or the blindness or the diabetic kidney disease or the hypertensive kidney disease. So move on to the next topic, the complications of type 2 diabetes patients in Southeast Asians compared to the others. And you can see a nice table, the complications of type 2 diabetes mellitus in Southeast Asians compared with white Europeans. And the parameters were taken like it is nephropathy, again the term is the diabetic kidney disease. Repeatedly I tell you, because we need to follow the international nomenclature, it is diabetic kidney disease. And the retinopathy and the cardiovascular disease and the peripheral neuropathy and the peripheral vascular disease. And you can see the two tables, like the one is the differences relative to white Europeans and the probable mechanisms. And when we compare the Southeast Asians, that is Indians, compared with white Europeans, the diabetic kidney disease, we have got increased risk, and the probable mechanisms are more rapid glycemic deterioration and the delayed diagnosis and less robust management of hypertension and the diabetes. So the pathetic part of our Indian scenario is that diabetes comes 10 years early when compared to the Caucasians or the whites. So we are prone to the complications when it is 10 years early. Automatically our people are more prone to the macrovascular or the microvascular or the non-specific complications of diabetes, like the periodontitis and so many other complications which are seen with this uncontrolled type 2 diabetes. And when it comes to the retinopathy, it is also, we are also at increased risk when compared to the white Europeans because of the more rapid glycemic deterioration, and maybe because of the therapeutic inertia. Again, it is the clinician's inertia or the patient's inertia, and the delayed diagnosis always is the biggest risk factor, and less robust management of hypertension and the diabetes. And coming to the cardiovascular disease, that includes both the myocardial infarction and the stroke, and the probable high risk and more data is needed with regards to this particular when compared to the white Europeans, and less use of statins is the basic cause. And even if we use the statins, majority of the patients and the majority of the clinicians, they are not aware that statin use is for lifetime. See, once you start statin, there is no stopping of statin at all. See, it is a marathon run. You should use the statin as long as the patient lives or dies, whichever is earlier, whichever is applicable very earlier. So the less use of statins is the cause for the cardiovascular disease, and less use of the antihypertensive drugs in native Southeast Indians, that is the one of the biggest problems. They always try to manage the hypertension and diabetes with one single antihypertensive agent, which is not sufficient. To tell you the take home message is, any patient suffering from diabetes and coexisting comorbidity hypertension, always it's better to start with the lifestyle modification, diet and a dual therapy, and if necessary you should go for a triple drug therapy. And if the patient is suffering from resistant hypertension, you have to add the MRAs, that is the mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists like spironolactone 25 to 50 milligram once a day. And the more uncontrolled glycemic levels is the cause for the cardiovascular disease. And per se, I would like to mention that the microvascular complications are the diabetes dependent complications, whereas the macrovascular complications like the myocardial infarction or the stroke and the peripheral arterial disease are multifactorial in origin, because you have multiple risk factors. Like if you control the blood sugars meticulously, definitely there is going to be some change in the outcomes of the getting into the risk of cardiovascular disease, but it is not totally dependent on the glycemic levels, because the cardiovascular disease, the risk factors are multifactorial, like the diabetes, like hypertension, like dyslipidemia and lipoprotein little a, and obesity, sedentary lifestyle, smoking, alcohol. The list goes on, like so several factors are involved in the risk of cardiovascular disease. So we need to address this particular problem of cardiovascular disease with a multi-pronged therapy to the possible extent. So ABC, always you remember, you target at ABC, you try to get the HbA1c somewhere around 6.5. Those patients, for those who don't have the fear of hypoglycemia, and for the other population less than 7%, and B stands for blood pressure. It should be always like less than or around 120 to 130 of systolic and 80 of diastolic, and the cholesterol should be the bad cholesterol. You target the LDLC always. LDLC must be less than 70 milligrams per deciliter. If you can tackle these all along with the lifestyle modification, that is diet and exercise with a DASH diet, that is dietary approaches to stop hypertension, and with weight reduction, and with cessation of smoking and cessation of alcohol, you can achieve the goal of reducing the risk of the cardiovascular disease. And the risk factors for this cardiovascular disease is higher dyslipidemia at an younger age, because most of the doctors are in a dilemma whether to start a statin, at what age you should start, what statin you should start with a young patient. Suppose 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, whether you should go for the moderate intensity statin or high intensity statins. See, they have got lot of questions in their mind before they prescribe a statin, and that is much delayed. Once the statin usage is delayed, you cannot address the dyslipidemia properly, which predisposes to the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. And coming to the peripheral neuropathy, the prevalence is lower, but in my practice, I have got an experience of 30 years as an endocrinologist in my own center, Sepuri Diabetes and Endocrine Center. I have seen at least 3 to 4 patients in every 5 patients. They do have this peripheral neuropathy, but the textbooks and the theory says the neuropathy incidence is 30%. It is astonishingly like maybe in the Western scenario it is less, because they don't go barefoot at all, because they have the habit of wearing the socks and shoe as a routine part of their daily life. But most of the times Indian farmers, Indian people, they go barefoot. Even the richest of the rich also, they go barefoot to the temples in the midsummer, and they come with some diabetic foot problems. Many a time I have seen even the rich people and the poor people coming with diabetic foot problems when they are exposed to the hearts and without any proper the shoes or the chappals. And the cause is possibly related to the lower height than white Europeans is the cause for lower incidence of peripheral neuropathy according to this slide. And the peripheral vascular disease also has got a lower prevalence, and possible it is related to the lower height and the lower rates of smoking than white Europeans. And nowadays, of late, smoking is very much increasing in even our society also, because it is much less when compared to the whites, the Caucasians, the Americans or the Canadians or the Central America or the European subcontinent, where almost every female smokes, and most of the males they do smoke, and they are habituated to this type of smoking from childhood, and they continue. When compared to our Indian scenario, they have got the more prevalence of the smoking habits. And coming to the next part of our agenda, the pathophysiological peculiarities of type 2 diabetes mellitus in our Southeast Asians. And the factors are the poor insulin secretion, that is insulinopenia, that is impaired beta cell reserve, and the ectopic fat deposition, and the low lean muscle mass in the South Asian population. And coming to the slide, you can see the graph, and the last curve that is showing is the South Asians is the uninterrupted straight black curve you see, that is the poor insulin secretion, that is insulinopenia, and the impaired beta cell reserve. And in this context I would like to tell you that by the time you diagnose a case of type 2 diabetes in your OPD, the 50% of the beta cell functioning beta cells are dead, so only 50% is remaining. This is postulated by DiFranco, I think it's around some 3 decades ago. And later on he only postulated again, saying that by the time you diagnose this particular type 2 diabetes in your OPD, 50 to 80% of the beta cells are dead. This is according to my teacher Ralph Anthony DiFranco. Is a stalwart in the field of endocrinology and diabetes. So the impaired beta cell reserve is the cause for this particular the type 2 diabetes. And once the beta cell reserve, that is the functioning beta cell reserve, goes below 25%, no oral anti-diabetic drug is going to work for that particular patient. Insulin becomes inevitable for lifetime actually. So the HOMA beta levels, that is the homeostasis model assessment of the beta cell function, which is delivered by means of the fasting plasma glucose and the insulin concentrations, the HOMA beta levels were lower among the South Asians compared with all other racial and ethnic groups. After adjustment for age and adiposity, you can see it very clearly in the graph. You find the whites with the black dotted line, the African Americans, even the Latinos nothing but there are 7 countries which are called the Latinos actually. They are in the down the United States of America. See, 7 countries are named as Latin countries, that is the Latinos, and the Chinese. Even when compared to our own Asian country, Chinese, we have got a poor insulin secretion and an impaired beta cell reserve. That is the reason why we Indians are running badly short of this insulin from the functioning beta cells. And on top of it, the background pathology is always one is insulinopenia and the second is the severe insulin resistance. And both these can be measured by this HOMA beta levels as well as the HOMA IR, that is insulin resistance levels. You can find out, you can make out in the laboratory the functioning beta cells actually. And I would like to convey a message, the latest update which has come in the last week only in the Journal of International, the Journal of Endocrinology and Metabolism, that there are the beta cell number is important, and as that is called BCN, beta cell number is important, and beta cell mass is also important, which is called BCM. So these two are important determinants of diabetes actually, the beta cell number and the beta cell mass. And out of these two, they found out that beta cell number is more predominantly playing the role in determining the diabetes than the beta cell mass. I don't say that beta cell mass never counts, that also counts, but more than that, what is significant is the beta cell number. And moving on to the tale of two Indians, the metabolic differences between the Pima and Asian Indians. See, this is not actually the tale of two Indians, because the Asian Indians are nowhere related to the Pima Indians. Pima Indians are the people, the Native Americans, the primitive Native Americans, the tribes which are there prevalent along the river Gila actually in the United States of America. and they are basically they are in the Arizona area and the central Mexico. Actually, the Pima Indians are more prevalent in these two areas, and the way this river Gila flows and the central Arizona and the South Mexico. So when you compare this, the Asian Indians with the Pima Indians, you find on the left hand side, even with normoglycemia, Asian Indians had lower mean fasting and insulin secretion as compared to Pima Indians. You can see the glycemic status in the left hand side, the bar diagram. The blue is the Pima Indian and the orange is the Asian Indian. First you find normal and you find the impaired fasting glucose, then you find the impaired glucose tolerance, and put together impaired fasting glucose and impaired glucose tolerance, that is a stage of pre-diabetes and diabetes. When you compare with this Pima Indians, you can see the IFG or the IGT or the IFG plus IGT or the diabetes is also the fasting plasma insulin is very low in Asian Indians when compared to the Pima Indians. The Pima Indians, the characteristic features of the type 2 diabetes in Pima Indians is they have got they are obese. First of all, when compared to Indians, Asian Indians, Pima Indians are very obese and they have got severe insulin resistance. At the same time, they have got severe insulinopenia. These are the characteristic triad of the type 2 diabetes mellitus in the Pima Indians. The one is they are very obese and they have got severe insulin resistance and they have got severe insulinopenia. These are the three characteristic features of the type 2 diabetes seen in Pima Indians. We are not bothered about Pima Indians because Pima Indians are not our Indians. They don't live in the south, they don't live in the north, they don't live in the east, west or the central part of India. They live in the United States of America, Arizona, actually the river Gila and the Mexico. And coming to the bar diagram on the right hand side, this is the glycemic status again following a 75 gram oral glucose tolerance test. Asian Indians exhibited a significantly lower 30-minute insulin levels. So on the x-axis you can see the same. The blue is the Pima Indians and the orange is the Asian Indians. Normal and the impaired fasting glucose and the impaired glucose tolerance and the impaired fasting glucose and impaired glucose tolerance, pre-diabetes and diabetes. And on the y-axis you see the insulin 30 minutes after giving this particular 75 gram of the OGTT, and you find this is very low when compared to the Pima Indians. The South Indians had the low insulin after the 75 gram of the 30-minute insulin levels. And Asian Indians, finally the conclusion is Asian Indians had roughly equal diabetes prevalence despite being lighter in terms of BMI. That's what I told you. Pima Indians are very obese and their body mass index is very high. Though we have the short stature and we are lean, our body mass is low, but the equal prevalence of diabetes in between these two Pima Indian subset and the Asian Indian subset. And let us talk about the ectopic fat deposition, especially the liver actually is the culprit here, and the lack of exercise. See, always the calories whatever you take, finally that will be converted into glucose and the body utilizes for the daily needs, that is the ready-made energy, and the remaining stored energy will be converted into fat cell and will be deposited in the liver. So thereby it replaces each the fat cell replaces the hepatic cell, thereby after some time the liver totally becomes fatty, and that's what when we order in ultrasound abdomen we get the results from the radiologist saying that grade 1 fatty liver, grade 2 fatty liver, grade 3 fatty liver. And when you go to this particular the medical gastroenterologist with a fibroscan, you can assess the fat deposition in the liver. That is done in the OP procedures, and the entire this process is called broadly called the fatty liver, is again divided into non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, that is NAFLD and NASH. They are very important. If you don't address that particular NAFLD in the initial period, that will progress on to the NASH. NASH will progress on to the scarring, that is fibrosis, that is cirrhosis of the liver, which in turn leads to the final dead end part is the hepatocellular carcinoma. So everybody should take care of this particular fatty liver. When you find this fatty liver in the ultrasound of abdomen, you have to be very vigilantly counsel the patient with regards to the possible complications, and you have to stop this by means of physical exercise, which plays the vital role. The diet and the exercise, the soft, bland, the vegetarian diet, which contains a lot of this particular proteins, and this the fiber, high fiber diet, and walk for 60 minutes, either in the form of exercise, either in the form of physical activity. Both are different. The take home message is both are not same. Exercise is different, physical activity is different. Again, physical activity is divided into mild intensity physical activity, moderate intensity physical activity, and severe intensity physical activity. That is mild, moderate and severe. Again, exercise is a different form. A harder version of this particular physical activity is called exercise. So one has to go for either the moderate to severe intensity physical exercise, the exercise, or this dietary modifications to reduce this particular incidence of NAFLD and NASH. And also you have to use drugs like metformin, and on top of it now the pioglitazone has coming to picture again. It has got lot of role in reversal of the NAFLD or the NASH. In the dose of 30 or 45 milligram per day, once a day, pioglitazone must be initiated if the patient doesn't have any contraindications like volume overload state, like the congestive heart failure, or the chronic renal failure, or the gross anemia, which makes the patient vulnerable to suddenly develop this volume overloaded state and leading to heart failures. And along with that, you have to use vitamin E 400 milligrams twice a day, and afterwards the DPP4 inhibitors and the SGLT2 inhibitors and the statins and the phenofibrates and this particular saroglitazar, and there's so many drugs to counter this particular the ectopic fat deposition. And coming to our slide, the Southeast Asians higher intakes of carbs and saturated fatty acids and trans fatty acids, and lower intake of the polyunsaturated fatty acids and the monounsaturated fatty acids and fiber. That's what I have been telling, the importance of fiber. Fiber is the integral part of our diet, must be very integral part of our diet. And out of the fiber, again there is insoluble fiber and soluble fiber, and the soluble fiber and insoluble fiber must be combinedly taken by the normal population also. And the fiber, the benefits of fiber are like fiber reduces the diabetes, fiber reduces the blood pressure, fiber reduces the cholesterol levels, and it reduces the incidence of coronary artery disease, it reduces the incidence of the strokes, it reduces the incidence of cancers, especially the colorectal cancers, which is on the rise in the Indian population nowadays. The colorectal cancer is growing like in abnormal proportions, and it prevents even the simple constipation. If you take fiber, we don't have the enzyme cellulase, so the fiber comes along with the fecal matter. And the ectopic fat accumulation that is seen mostly in the liver, that is seen with saturated fatty acid consumptions. Like if I have to tell you the saturated fatty acids, coconut oil is the best, the palm oil is the best example for this saturated fatty acids. That is the reason why I always tell in my every speaker program not to encourage your patients to take this particular coconut oil and the palm oil as edible oils. You can use the non-refined sunflower oil, non-refined groundnut oil, non-refined the rice bran oil. Even the olive oil is the best actually for toppings and all. You can take olive oil. Mere consumption of olive oil reduces the risk of cardiovascular disease by 27%. So Southeast Asians 30% higher intramuscular fat than the BMI matched Europeans, which was closely linked to the progression of progression from pre-diabetes to diabetes. This is very important point actually. So the hepatic and visceral fat have a detrimental role in diabetes and needs to be addressed. And the final take-home message is the ectopic fat deposition can lead to an impaired insulin action that can further result in earlier beta cell exhaustion, that is called the pancreatic bankruptcy. And coming to this slide which shows us the low lean mass in the South Asian population when compared to the males and females. So the bar diagram, the dark black is males and the interrupted ones are the females, and you see the whites, the Asians and the blacks. When you see the Asian males and the females, they had significantly lower lean mass when compared to the whites. You can see the bar diagram very clearly showing the high lean muscle mass which is seen in the whites and the blacks, that is even the Africans, and the Asians have got the lower lean mass compared to the whites and black males as well as females. And the genetic basis for low lean mass in the Southeast Asians is the increased selection of gene encoding myostatin, which leads to the inhibition of the skeletal muscle growth in the uterus, that leads to the low lean muscle mass. And the evolutionary biology, the long-term intergenerational influences like adaptation of agriculture and the stature of Southeast Asians has decreased, and the Mesothelic period, that is good nutrition, the relative tallness, that was in the Mesothelic period. And after this British colonization is nothing but when the Britishers came to India in the form of East India 200 years ago, they started colonizing the Indians, which has led to the malnourishment and the undernourishment, which has led to the short stature. And our ancestors, like you take the kings, when you go to the museums, you see the swords, you see the armors they wear. The sword itself is some 6 feet, and the armors are more than 8 to 9 feet. The armor shields what they use. See how tall that person must be, like that king must be, and the soldiers must be at that particular time. Now we are seeing shorter statures, lower lean muscle mass, and poorer organ development, and increased susceptibility for diabetes in the Indian population. That is called the evolutionary biology. And you can see the differences between the phenotype 2A versus 2B in this slide. And on the left hand side you can see the phenotype 2A with wide beta cell capacity, and on the right hand side you can see the phenotype 2B with a narrow beta cell capacity, and both of them that leads to the normal glucose, they start with this is the normal pathophysiology of diabetes. One should always remember this particular the diagram by Ralph Anthony DiFranco. It's a gold standard diagram. From normoglycemia, the patient gets into the IGT, that is impaired glucose tolerance. From then onwards, the impaired fasting glucose and impaired fasting glucose plus the impaired glucose tolerance, which again they lead to diabetes. And the Pima Indians, we see this at phenotype 2A, which is characterized by the basal metabolic state, the average fasting glucose, slight or moderate demand for insulin are managed efficiently over time through compensatory insulin secretion, and dominant form of prediabetes, that is in the form of the impaired glucose tolerance IGT, and the conversion to diabetes development on large accumulation of obesity and insulin resistance. That's what I have told you. And the characteristic features of the type 2 diabetes in the Pima Indians is the high body mass index with obesity and the high incidence of insulin resistance, severe insulin resistance, and very high incidence of this particular insulinopenia, gross insulinopenia. And the phenotype 2B, that is what we see in our Asian Indians, the same thing follows from normal glucose to it develops to a stage called impaired glucose tolerance. And I mind you, the impaired glucose tolerance should be measured only by giving 75 grams of oral glucose, that is 2 hours OGTT must be measured to label that particular patient as the impaired glucose tolerance. You cannot decide by just taking a plasma glucose sample, and you cannot say that anything that is in between the blood glucose in between 140 to 199 milligram per deciliter or 75 gram of the 2 hour OGTT is defined as the impaired glucose tolerance. The difference between the Pima Indians and the Asian Indians is the first one to rise in Pima Indians is the impaired glucose tolerance, and in the contrary, in the Indian subsegment, the first one to rise is the impaired fasting glucose, and naturally that leads to the impaired fasting glucose plus the impaired glucose tolerance, which again leads to the stage of overt diabetes. And the mechanisms here, the basal metabolic state, it is high fasting glucose, and slight or moderate demands for insulin lead to the strained beta cell and the acceleration of impaired early phase of insulin secretion, that is we call it as FIPR, that is loss of first phase of insulin response followed by the blunting of the second phase of insulin response, is the characteristic feature why we find the high postprandial glucose levels in type 2 diabetes mellitus in our Indian scenario. And the dominant form of the prediabetes is the impaired fasting glucose, whereas I told you the prominent type of the prediabetes is impaired glucose tolerance in Pima Indians. And conversion to diabetes may occur even with small increase in insulin resistance, that is even the slightest insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is always at the level of muscle, at the level of fat, at the level of liver, leads to diabetes. This is the characteristic differences between the phenotype A, which is seen in the Pima Indians, and the phenotype 2B, which is seen in the Asian Indians. And to summarize, the evolutionary determined on the right hand side and the left hand side, and the response to lifestyle on the right hand side, and evolutionary determined that leads to poor beta cell function, that leads to impaired insulin secretion, and that leads to increased type 2 diabetes susceptibility. and whereas the low lean muscle mass that leads to impaired insulin secretion, and the responses to lifestyle that leads to ectopic fat deposition in the liver and the muscle, and that leads to impaired insulin action. This is vice versa. The impaired insulin action may lead to the ectopic fat deposition in the liver or muscle, or the ectopic fat deposition in the liver or muscle may lead to impaired insulin action, and put together triggered by this low lean muscle mass that leads to the susceptibility to the increased type 2 diabetes mellitus in the Indian continent, that is Southeast Asian continent. These are all the pathophysiological peculiarities in the Southeast Asians. And coming to the last part of the topic, the clinical implications for insulin therapy in Southeast Asian phenotype. The clinical implications of the Southeast Asian phenotype, you can see on the left hand side the South Asian phenotype, and on the right hand side you can see the clinical implications. The high incidence rate, the clinical implication is large number of individuals are involved and strain on the healthcare systems. Because of huge population, it's already it's a burden on the healthcare system, and our healthcare system is terribly burdened by this COVID pandemic. We have seen how bad our healthcare system is, and now they are going to slowly streamlining this particular healthcare system, and the occurrence of type 2 diabetes at younger ages and the lower BMI, it is the clinical implications. The risk scores and screening criteria derived from the Western populations may not be appropriate. We need to have our Indian risk scores, our Indian screening criteria must be separate, and we should, it is high time we have to focus on this particular parameters. And the faster progression through the stages of prediabetes is like prevention strategies may need to be applied at all stages of normal glucose tolerance rather than the prediabetes, and the spread of epidemic to rural areas and involvement of lower socio-economic classes. Once upon we used to say, like when we were students, we used to say that diabetes is the disease of the rich. It is no more a disease of the rich. It is no more a disease related to the cities. It has come down to the small cities and the metros, and even the small towns, and even the rural population, small villages, hamlets also we are seeing, and we are seeing at the all socio-economic classes, we are seeing diabetes, irrespective of the old theory that diabetes is a disease of the rich. And the clinical implications are lack of affordability and accessibility of modern diabetes management, and consequent poor control and high risk of complications. And coming to the last point, the relatively early loss of beta cell function, which is very very characteristic of our Southeast Asian phenotype, that is the failure of metformin monotherapy more likely, and the requires early insulin initiation and persistence to this therapy. I have been telling many times that early insulin initiation is the key to all these problems. So the insulin should be initiated very early in the disease process, so as not to lose the functioning beta cell number and the beta cell mass, both the BCN and the BCM. And we should congratulate these Novo Nordisk people that they are the ones who started this hypothesis of early initiation of insulin. And management of type 2 diabetes in Southeast Asians, and this is the need of our early and aggressive management of hyperglycemia in Southeast Asians should be considered, and guidelines and algorithms developed for use in Western countries may not be applicable in entirely the Southeast Asians, that is the Indians, and there is a clear need for developing the specific guidelines for the pharmacotherapy of type 2 diabetes in our population, considering the characteristic phenotype and the diet and the socio-economic pattern and the cultural patterns. And DTT is nothing but diabetes technology and therapeutics. The efforts towards the India specific approach, a proposed India specific algorithm for management of type 2 diabetes, the Indian Diabetes Management Algorithm Proposal Group. The right insulin strategy for Southeast Asians. So we can see in this particular slide, it's a very important slide, this stratification 1, stratification 2 and stratification 3. The stratification 1 is the where the HbA1c is less than 9% and according to the BMI levels, and stratification 2 is where HbA1c levels are around or more than 9% or plasma blood glucose of around or more than 240 milligram per deciliter, and stratification 3 is nothing but severe morbidity. And you can see the first line therapy for stratification 1 is monotherapy with this metformin or the sulfonylurea or the DPP4, and when it comes to the stratification 2 respectively, the combination of two OADs, that is either sulfonylurea plus metformin or metformin plus the DPP4 inhibitor, ad evidenced by the verified trial which was the disclosed way back in 2019 in the EASD sessions at Barcelona, and consider the triple OAD therapy and insulin in the selected cases. And the risk stratification 3, insulin is the drug of choice with or without oral anti-diabetic drugs. And the second line therapy is add insulin for stratification 1, add a second oral agent like sulfonylurea, DPP4 inhibitors or the alpha glucosidase inhibitors or the GLP-1 receptor agonists or the SGLT2 inhibitors or this particular the thiazolidinediones, the wonderful molecule they have not mentioned is the particular pioglitazone. And coming to the stratification 2 respectively, add insulin, add third oral agent as like sulfonyl, this particular the SGLT2 inhibitors or the GLP-1 receptor agonists or the AJ or the TZT. And the stratification 3 is always we have started insulin, so intensification of insulin. And coming to the third line of therapy, first stratification 1 is insulin plus multiple OADs or intensify the insulin if already initiated. And coming to the stratification 2 respectively, they add insulin and intensify insulin therapy if already initiated. Coming to the stratification 3 respectively is they intensify insulin therapy and consider adding GLP-1 receptor to the insulins. Now we should start using this GLP-1 receptor agonist because as per the latest the American Diabetes Association and the EASD guidelines 2021 are the recommendations by the American College of Endocrinology bar the American Association for the Clinical Endocrinologists 2021 or the European Society of Diabetes on the European Society for the Study of Diabetes, the European Society of Cardiology, ESC and the EASD 2019, that was the first to say that you have to start either the GLP-1 receptor agonist or the SGLT2 inhibitors in case you think that the patient is at risk of developing atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease or has established atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, whether the patient is on metformin or not. So that is the latest recommendations. That's what they say. So always they consider using the insulin therapy, consider adding GLP-1 receptor where the SGLT2 is contraindicated with regards to this low EGFR, either stage 4 or stage 5 chronic kidney disease or chronic kidney failure, where you cannot initiate this particular the SGLT2 inhibitors. Along with insulin, you can add the GLP-1 receptor agonists like the insulin. I'm sorry. Liraglutide or dulaglutide. And we have come to the last part, that is the take home message, the summary. Southeast Asians have alarmingly high incidence and prevalence of pre-diabetes and diabetes, and type 2 diabetes mellitus in Southeast Asians are characterized by impaired beta cell reserve, ectopic fat deposition and low lean muscle mass, and early and aggressive management of hyperglycemia in Southeast Asians should be considered. Guidelines and algorithms developed for use in Western countries may not be applicable in the entirety of the Asian Indians, and South Asians require early insulin initiation and persistence to therapy because of the insulinopenia and the insulin resistance. And thank you very much for patient listening. Now I hand over to Dr. Sepuri Tirumala Devi for the second talk.